Joining me live now is the Finance Minister, Simon Birmingham. Minister, good morning to you. So Labor is announcing its Pacific plan today. It's going to include a bunch of things, such as an increase of aid, doubling of aerial surveillance for economic zones in the Pacific. What are your thoughts on what you've been able to read and see so far?
G'day, Pete. It's good to be with you. Well, from what I can see, these appear to be token announceables designed for some cheap election headlines from the Labor Party, particularly when you compare them with the scale and effort of the Pacific step-up that our government has delivered over recent years. And we've increased development assistance for the Pacific from around $1.1 billion to $1.8 billion. We've established a $3 billion infrastructure fund that is delivering practical assistance into Pacific Island nations, providing around $700 million in climate finance into the Pacific, and our $2 billion Pacific Defence Investment Strategy is delivering practical equipment, patrol boats to support Pacific Island nations. Compare that against a Labor policy that seems to think a few extra dollars for the ABC to project into the Pacific is somehow going to change the dial. Frankly, this is all about the headlines the Labor Party wants in the election campaign rather than the substance. And what you can see throughout this election campaign is that the Morrison government has clear policy plans for Australia's future, has substance and detail behind the policies that we're implementing across the country, versus a Labor Party when as soon as you scratch the surface on any of their policies, they fall apart pretty quickly. Yet
what you have implemented in the Pacific still wasn't enough or isn't enough to stop China from moving into the Solomon Islands.
Pete, if we have a look at what China has been doing over recent years in terms of their efforts right around our region to position themselves with potential military bases in the South China Sea, to advance their positioning in countries across Southeast Asia, such as in Cambodia, the advances they've made in parts of Africa or in Sri Lanka in terms of military presence. We know that this is a constant effort from them, and it requires a constant response from us. We won't be able to get every single country to do everything we would wish as we would wish them to do it. But what we have secured from the Solomon Islands are commitments to ensure that there will not be foreign military bases established in the Solomon Islands. That's a very important commitment from the Solomon Islands, as well as their statements that Australia remains their security partner of choice, and we remain committed to providing them that direct assistance and support, as we've done even just in these last few months with the Morrison government providing additional security assistance to the Solomon Islands.
Yet Xi Jinping told Barack Obama in 2014 that he wouldn't militarise the South China Sea. And look what happened. So you can't really take the Solomons' word for it, can you, if they're receiving this funding from China, which would now be their masters?
Well, Pete, you are correct in the sense that we have to be ever vigilant. Australia remains the largest development assistance partner to the Solomon Islands. So our assistance there, it is across other Pacific Island nations, is very significant, and we will continue to invest in that partnership with them. We will work cooperatively to ensure the commitments they've made are ones that are upheld, and we won't just work with the Solomon Islands in doing that. We'll work with our other members of the Pacific family, partners such as Fiji, other significant nations across the Pacific Islands Forum, partners such as Papua New Guinea as well, where we continue to engage closely, and who assisted us recently in the provision of policing and other support to help the Solomon Islands through their recent troubles. But this does require constant vigilance, and that's why it requires a government who's got the track record, as we have, of investing in our increased defences as a nation, restoring defence spending, which had fallen to its lowest level since 1938 when we were elected, and we've now built that up from 1.56% of GDP back up to around or more than 2% of GDP, and in that we're delivering extra personnel in our defence forces, additional missile capabilities and defences. We've built boats that are now in service and operation for our Navy, and of course have extensive plans to build more, and we've provided within that increased defence cooperation and capability to nations.
A lot of that capability, though, won't be available for many years to come. We're getting into the back end of the next decade. But if China sets up a naval base on the Solomon Islands,
Pete, and parts of it are available today too.
Yeah, but a lot of the heavy investment, a lot of the heavy machinery, though, the big announcements are not going to be available for a way down the track. You know that. We all know that. But if China sets up a naval base on the Solomon Islands,
additional missiles are quite quick things.
if China sets up a naval base in the Solomon Islands and that is the red line for Scott Morrison, what is the response going to be?
But firstly, just to underscore the fact that Prime Minister Songavari has been clear that there will not be foreign military bases established in the Solomon Islands. And so holding them to that commitment and working to ensure that is honoured is the most important thing first and foremost. But as the US have indicated, were there to be within the Pacific some Chinese military presence on a permanent basis, the US would see a need to respond and potentially respond in kind, and we would, of course, as the Prime Minister has said, see that as a red line ourselves and work cooperatively with our US partners, our other partners around the world, but most importantly, those other Pacific Island nations. This is something we want to avoid. Our view is that the peace and prosperity of the Pacific is best enabled through Pacific-led security solutions. That's what we successfully delivered for the Solomon Islands when they faced their recent troubles, as we've done before, where Australia joined with Fiji, joined with New Zealand, joined with Papua New Guinea to provide the direct assistance, Pacific-led, provided practically to ensure that they could restore safety and security.
What does that mean? What does that mean, a response? When you're talking about red lines, they have been wrong before, notable by Barack Obama when it was the Syrian red line and he did nothing. I mean, what can we do?
Well, Pete, as is well known, the US has extensive operational capability across the region. Now, how you might pivot or enhance that operational capability in partnership with countries like Australia, but also other regional partners, they're things we would have to contemplate if we came to it. But first and foremost, we're going to work to seek to prevent it. We shouldn't get too far ahead of ourselves with the hypothetical questions. We have secured, through the cooperation with Pacific Island friends and family, firm commitments from the Solomon Islands Prime Minister about there not being foreign military bases there. And our Pacific Step-Up plans, with the billions of dollars of substantial investment and substance and policy detail, which frankly is entirely lacking from the tokenistic announcements of the Labor Party today, our plans and investments are the types of things that will deliver the outcomes to try to continue to keep that peace and prosperity in the Pacific.
Okay, well, I've got the Shadow Defence Minister coming on the program. I'm putting those questions to him as well. But Finance Minister Simon Birmingham, appreciate your time this morning. Thank you. We'll talk to you again soon.